Today we have no questions, since last time we did not reach the end of section 13.2 of the preliminary materials of the training course, the Sufficiently General Theory of Governance. And we will continue to review the text of section 13.2. Last time we stopped at the fact that there may be a certain set of mutually nested supersystems, and, in this set, a hierarchically higher in relation to them governance towards each supersystem can be carried out both directly and indirectly impacting it through other supersystems. For a person with an I-centric world understanding, such a division of the flow of governance into two components, direct governance and indirect governance, seems absurd. They say, why govern indirectly what is possible to govern directly? Such an approach is really possible if you govern one thing. If you govern one thing, then it is really easier to govern this object directly, and other objects that are outside your governance turn out to be simply elements of the environment with which your object must interact in a mode acceptable for you. If, though, we consider a certain set of objects of governance that interact both with the environment and with each other, then it turns out that in such cases, direct governance towards each of the objects somehow generates or can generate some impact on other objects, and accordingly, in order for direct governance towards them to be effective, you must also take care that the indirect governance, which is a consequence of the direct governance towards other objects, corresponds to the tasks that you set in the tasks of governance towards some of these objects. That is, the absurdity of such a division of a hierarchically higher in relation to the supersystem governance into direct and direct is illusory. Moreover, if we consider the entire creation as a supersystem, which includes a plurality of mutually nested supersystems, then what for us seems to be indirect governance towards some supersystems, then for the hierarchically highest, all-encompassing governance, this is a certain flow of total governance towards the entire creation as a whole. Therewith, some processes in creation flow in a mode of self-governance. Therefore, this fact must be simply taken into account. You have to understand its objective inevitability in many cases. And, in some cases, if you set some specific tasks of governance, then there is the objective need to build governance in exactly the same way as a set of flows of direct governance towards several supersystems.
Каждой из суперсистем рождается опосредованное управление в отношении каких-то других суперсистем.
And in this direct governance towards each of these supersystems, there arises indirect governance in relation to some other supersystems. In the life of society, when does it manifest itself? This usually manifests itself when someone is trying to weave intrigues. Because if more than 3 intrigues are weaving at the same time, then the matrix of their mutual influence is 3 by 3. And it turns out that if the number of intrigues is more than 3, then it's difficult for a person to govern more than 3 intrigues at the same time, simply by strength of the fact that in their mutual influence, there can arise some cross-impacts on each other. And as a result, the quality of governance towards the entire set of intrigues may decline, with lower qualifications. Even 2 intrigues are difficult to weave, because precisely from the circumstance stems the saying, you try to kill 2 birds with 1 stone, and you kill none. But nevertheless, I was not saying this so that the listeners studying the sufficiently general theory of governance would engage in intrigue and achieve success in this and defeat the intriguing competitors. In fact, this kind of thing is impossible, because self-servingness in the supersystem called humanity, in that supersystem called the noosphere of the planet, it is not supported. For some time it can proceed in the mode of allowance. That is, the Almighty, having given man the right to freedom of choice, also gave him the right to commit errors. But the error is not limitless. The right to commit errors is limited. And if you exhaust these limits for committing errors, which are set for you personally, then you should expect all sorts of troubles, which at first carry an unreasoning, restraining character. And if you are very persistent, then this can lead you to the end of this given life. Therefore, if we look at the supersystem from the position of the conjugated with it intellect as a whole, then the existence of the supersystem always flows under the pressure of the environment in interaction with it. Intellects that exercise hierarchically higher governance in relation to the supersystem always themselves determine the character of how they will interact with the supersystem and govern it, including the governance towards its self-governance. Maximum. This is the flow of continuous giving out of instructions to the hierarchically higher level of governance towards the supersystem and control over their conduction. But minimum. This is the provision of complete independence in governance towards the supersystem to the conjugated intellect and other intellects that participate in this process. But within the boundaries that are recognized as admissible by the hierarchically higher governance. But nonetheless, in any case, every element of the supersystem is tasked with withstanding the pressure of the environment. And if we analyze the processes of the supersystemic level, then it turns out that the number of free elements is the margin of stability of the supersystem to increase the capacity of its interaction with the environment, or increase its capacity to solve some of its specific tasks. Therefore, on the one hand, the maximum effectiveness of the supersystem in some mode requires the participation of a lesser amount of elements in this mode as possible. Then there emerge free capacities that can be used to solve problems. But if the task is to ensure the maximum production of the supersystem in the current conditions, then there should be no free capacities. Everything should be loaded and occupied. This paradoxical situation leads to the fact that if the pressure of the environment increases, or the need for some actions of the supersystem increases, and this need cannot be realized, since there are no free elements. If this need is of some specific character, which corresponds to its position in the vector of objectives of governance, the question arises about the hierarchy of the vector of objectives of governance and the possibility of refusing to fulfill tasks connected with the objectives of lower priorities, in order that the freed up capacity could be transferred to serving these tasks. But serving these tasks can also be limited, because any actions require informational algorithmic support first of all, and if this informational algorithmic support is not available, then material, energetic, and other resources, they cannot be used, because the task of governance towards them is not solved. So, in any case, in the vector of objectives of governance towards the supersystem, the first priority will be the objective, abidance in the environment with a certain margin of stability, in case of an increase in the pressure of the environment. Because if this margin of stability is absent, then this is actually a mode of survival, which will not necessarily be successful. Biological species are also supersystems. And in the biological species, this whole circumstance is fixed in the fundamental part of the informational support of specimens, and is expressed in their behavior as fear and instinct for self-preservation. But there are also some other instinctive programs connected with ensuring the survival of a biological species, ensuring the preservation of its reproductive potential. And also there are some other questions connected precisely with the reproduction of the biological species. If we talk about humanity, then there are different biological classifications. In some biological classifications, man is simply part of the fauna. But there are biological classifications, in particular, Vladimir Ivanovich Dahl adhered to such a view, in which man is not a part of the fauna, but a special kingdom, like the kingdom of plants, the kingdom of animals, the kingdom of mushrooms. So, man is a special kingdom. Why? In my opinion, V.I. Dahl in this matter was right. Because if you are building a certain classification, then what belongs to a certain class must be characterized by a certain set of final features. And now, if we correlate this set of final features, then all animals are characterized by a certain set of features. And man, as a biological species, is characterized by a wider set of features. And the set of features that characterize all representatives of the fauna of the Earth's biosphere is only a subplurality of the set of features that characterize man as a biological species. Therefore, man really is not a part of the biosphere of the planet like all other biological species, but at the same time in the biosphere of the planet, he forms a special kingdom, which has the right to exist precisely thanks to the fact that man differs from everything else, including in the potential for personal and social development, which he can realize to the measure of his understanding by volitional order. This possibility is currently closed to representatives of other biological species. If we correlate to the task of interacting with the environment and abidance in the environment, then increasing the margin of stability of a system that is in the environment in the number of elements that are not engaged in such interaction with it in solving tasks of survival. This allows increasing the productiveness of the supersystem in relation to the environment in solution of some other tasks. Both tasks related to the impact of the supersystem on the environment and tasks connected with the development of the supersystem and its reaching the maximally high quality which is predetermined for it. Therefore, the total margin of stability of the supersystem in relation to these two integral objectives also represents element resources that are always unused at a given time. If this provision is considered in relation to humanity, then in fact it turns out that as long as the economy exists, then the effectiveness is conditioned by how many people are employed in the economy. And in principle, purely governorially, the question arises that the fewer people are employed in economic activity, the higher the quality of governance towards the supersystem, the social economic supersystem. But further the question arises, if people are freed from economic activity, then what to do with them? There is no answer to this question in the liberal market economic model. Since there is no answer to this question, the social economic processes of the liberal market economic model are largely oriented towards destroying the economically excessive population in one way or the other. How is the destruction of the economically excessive population carried out? Through the spread of all kinds of vices in the life of society. All conversations on the theme of combating drug addiction, alcoholism, morbidity, in the liberal market model, either express the idiocy of sincere blago-intentioned people, or are deliberately false, deliberate lies, deliberate hypocrisy. Since an economically excessive population is really economically excessive and presents a problem for society. The easiest way to solve this problem is to liquidate the economically excessive population. Hence, the family planning programs, behind which there are programs for the destruction of future generations, the spread of drug addiction, the spread of all kinds of sexual perversions that destroy the reproductive potential of society, a decrease in the resource characteristics of objects of the technosphere. Because if, for example, complex technical devices could serve for decades with appropriate maintenance, maybe in principle a complex step-by-step modernization of these objects, introduced into their design as the need arises, or as scientific technological progress can improve the characteristics, such a conception of governance towards the economy could free up a great deal of people. That is, it would increase the number of economically excessive population. Since the task is to destroy the economically excessive population, and, in addition, it's necessary to provide employment for the remaining population, then the liberal market economic model follows the principle. The caprice of fashion dictates demand. This allows to reduce the technical resources of the majority of types of products. In the ideal, everything should be disposable. This will ensure universal employment. But nonetheless, this leads to an unacceptable effect of civilization on the biosphere and leads it to self-destruction. This is one of the dead-end paths. Accordingly, the economy, economic activity, is one of the components of the task of ensuring the stability of the existence of the supersystem called humanity in the natural environment, since we protect ourselves from the natural environment by economic activities, production of food, production of artificial habitats, and everything else. But never in the philosophy of this civilization has the task been posed of building a civilization harmoniously interacting with nature, in which man would not need the technosphere and the system of production as a means of protection from the natural environment. So if we set the task, not that the economy should be simply effective, and as few people as possible should be employed in it, but we set the task that the population that is being freed from economic activity, both in the adult generations and in the younger generations, should be reoriented towards the solution of some other tasks. The only task to which it seems possible to reorient is the personal development of people who, over time, in the continuity of generations, with the change of generations, would ultimately make it possible to build a civilization in which the technosphere, in fact, is not a necessary element, although some technical activity would be possible. And man in this civilization would live in harmony with nature, relying on nature, but not defending himself from her. Because in the broadest view, the need for protection from nature is an indicator that civilization is developing not in the direction in which it should be developing. Yesterday in one discussion, the question about relict cultures arose, that is, about those tribes, peoples, who in their historical development have now found themselves in what, from the point of view of high-tech societies, is called a primitive system. You see, if the catastrophe of the current global civilization cannot be avoided, then the survival in a real natural environment of people accustomed to a toilet bowl and a supermarket will be impossible. And while these relict cultures remain at the primitive level, this is a kind of sign that civilization is developing incorrectly, and they are a reserve in case the current civilization collapses in some kind of global catastrophe. Since only they possess certain skills of life without developed technospheres and interaction with the natural environment. Moreover, this applies to both northern peoples, who live on a very primitive basis from our point of view, technogenic civilization, and those who live in a milder climate, in the tropics, subtropics, and also preserve primitive, from the point of view of technically advanced cultures, ways of life. Therefore, the main question of any supersystem and humanity as a supersystem is what to do with the elements that are freeing themselves. At the moment of the appearance of a supersystem in the environment, the inordering of the plurality of its constituent elements is of a two-level character. Level 1, every one of the elements. The second level is the supersystem as a whole. From the point of view of an individual within the boundaries of the supersystem, the interaction of these individuals is purely random. Although, in a broader view, their interaction may be far from random, and their interaction can express governance on the basis of virtual structures, which penetrates the supersystem from the outside and, above all, from the hierarchically higher levels of governance of the supersystem called creation. And so the mastery of the potential of development begins from this state. And in such a state, when interacting with the environment, in general, many elements interact in accordance with their informational algorithmic support, and the processes about which I spoke last time will take place. In the supersystem, there may arise autonomous regions, and within the boundaries of the supersystem, there are autonomous regions. There can arise various kinds of structural and structureless formations, which are also in some way inordered. Therefore, in the course of such governance, several classes can be singled out. The first one is a continuous interaction with the environment, constant in time and in character. There may be cyclically regular repeating interactions. In the life of the biosphere, this is connected with the change of seasons. There may be a statistically inordered episodic interaction. This kind of interaction includes the reaction to all sorts of natural catastrophes, disasters, and technogenic troubles. When, in the overwhelming majority of cases, we cannot say when they will occur, but, nonetheless, the statistics are more or less stable and invariable over time. And based on the analysis of statistical data, we in fact can, in the probabilistic statistical sense, prognose the development of the situation and allocate certain resources that are necessary for the reaction to the situation if it arises. At the initial stage of the development of the supersystem, everything is mainly based on the fundamental part of its informational algorithmic support, but not on the variable part, which should take shape and develop in the process of interaction with the environment, in the process of solving some internal tasks of the supersystem under the impact of the conjugated intellect of the supersystem or the intellects included in its composition. Nevertheless, this character of the interaction of the supersystem with the environment leads to the fact that there appear really structural formations in it that are connected with each of the classes of these interactions, with continuous interaction, with cyclic interaction, and with probabilistically statistically inordered interaction, which, with changes of the environment and the development of the supersystem, can change to a significantly greater extent than the first two components. But, nonetheless, governance is really error-free. Humanity, in the form in which it is not yet capable of this kind of governance. And further it turns out that errors are always accompanied by damage. If we analyze the character of the damage, its volume, then it turns out that very often the character of damage is conditioned by the time of the reaction of elements or a supersystem to the impact of the environment, or to the impact of some internal failures in the supersystem itself in the process of governance. One such simple example is that, well, God spare everyone, a fire. In the initial stage, at the moment of ignition and in the next minute or two, the source of ignition can be suppressed and localized. Within a longer period of time, the fire can be extinguished. If this time is not used properly, fires become catastrophic and completely destroy those objects that we value and that are precious to us. That is, questions of performance speed, in the overwhelming majority of cases, they play a very important role in the formation of evaluation of the quality of governance. And the questions of performance speed turn out to be connected with how exactly the supersystem reacts to these or those negative impacts. And here there arises a fork in the road, because there are two possible types of reaction. The first variant of the reaction is the transfer of elements carrying the corresponding informational algorithmic support to the place of the appearance of the problem. The second variant is the transfer of informational algorithmic support, which allows solving problems, to the place where the elements of the supersystem that interact with this problem are already located. These two strategies of interaction of the supersystem with the problem, they are principally different from each other, because if we are dealing with the spatial localization of the supersystem, then it turns out that the transfer of elements from point A to point B requires a lot of time, high costs, energy resources, and, in some cases, it may turn out to be overdue. This applies to both the reaction to natural disasters and military threats. But if you look at the second strategy, when everything is determined by the transfer of the corresponding informational algorithmic support, then this can significantly increase the performance speed of the reaction of the supersystem to the corresponding problem. Yes, of course, both methods are not interchangeable. But if we talk about fundamental possibilities, then the second method, the transfer of informational algorithmic support, in principle has a higher performance speed, and, accordingly, in principle it allows you to solve many tasks that cannot be solved on the basis of the first method, the method of transferring the resources of the supersystem to the problematic place. If we are talking about governance according to the predictor-corrector scheme, then the transfer of informational algorithmic resources may be accompanied by the transfer of some material resources that are necessary for the solution of the problem. And then it turns out that the second method, the method of transferring resources as a reaction to the problem, it gradually begins to lose its relevance, because if the governance is according to the predictor-corrector scheme, then the implementation of the proverb, "If I'd known where I would fall, I would have put some straw," becomes a part of the activity. And in those places where problems may arise, or where they are purpose-orientedly created, there, a proactively corresponding system is formed, primarily on account of the transfer of informational algorithmic support, and the accompanying it provision of various kinds of material technical resources. But if you are able to transfer informational algorithmic support from point A to point B quite quickly, and thereby solve the problem, then all the previously formed, functionally specialized structures, which are characterized by the presence in them also of certain informational algorithmic support, they gradually begin to lose their relevance. And, accordingly, after different levels of hierarchy in the supersystem have appeared, it ceases to be two-level in the sense that I said at first. Level 1, an element, level 2, the supersystem as a whole. Then the supersystem must inevitably return again to a two-level hierarchy, precisely conditioned by the fact that the possibility of fast transfer of informational algorithmic support from one element to another, and the use of this informational algorithmic support, they make unnecessary a quite big number of those hierarchies that took shape in the supersystem, every one of which provided the solution of some of their functionally specialized tasks. Further, another question of the competition of structures that take shape within the supersystem arises. You see, if the tasks are more or less stable in character and are, in a sense, standard, then a specialized structure, that carries the corresponding informational algorithmic support. It, in the overwhelming majority of cases, that is, with a probability close to 1, should have superiority over structures that have temporarily emerged as a result of the activities of amateurs.
Конкуренция структур, которые складываются в пределах суперсистемы. Понимаете, вот если задачи носят более
For this reason, in the overwhelming majority of cases, army units have always had superiority over partisan formations, at least in the initial stage of a partisan war. But, along with this, Henry Ford said something, the meaning of which can be expressed in the following words. If you want to ruin the endeavor, entrust it to specialists. Specialists know very well what can be done and how. And they know very well what cannot be done. But this statement about what cannot be done is accompanied by a default. It cannot be done on the basis of that knowledge, that is, of the informational algorithmic support that we have. And development is expressed in the fact that many things that in the past could not be done, mainly by reason of the absence of informational algorithmic support, are now easily and simply accomplished. And if we again return to the processes in supersystems, then yes, the probability that a stable structure with stable informational algorithmic support, specialized in some types of activity, will win in competition with a newly emerged certain structure simply by force of the fact that it is perfect, this probability is close to 1. But development takes place precisely on account of the fact that the probability is only close to 1. And a small probability, different from 0, anyway exists. That a certain structure that has arisen in the process of interaction of the supersystem with the environment in the solution of its internal tasks will generate some new informational algorithmic support, which will enable the solution of these tasks more effectively, with higher quality, and so on. And then the question arises, where will it most probably emerge? And the answer to this question is such that it's more probable that it will not emerge in the currently operating structures that solve standard tasks in standard ways, which in fact do not need anything. They function in a stable mode, and this stable mode is acceptable to them. The new emerges in a more probabilistic way, where people do not know that something cannot be done, and that it must be done exactly the way the already formed structures do it. Therefore, stagnation in professionalism is one of the factors that restrain development. Moreover, stagnation in professionalism in most cases is characteristic of high professionals who achieve success, and they are doing well. But those who increase their professionalism, or, being a high professional, were able to preserve freedom of world perception, freedom of intellectual activity, by strength of which They have not stagnated. It is precisely they who will be the creators of the new, and under the influence of precisely their activity, such stagnated structures are doomed to lose in the competition.
Поэтому закоснелость в профессионализме
Moreover, this is also largely connected with the performance speed. Because if you look at the history of economic activity in past times, then, in past times, large companies mostly absorbed small ones or destroyed them. In our time, companies that have a higher performance speed absorb the slow ones or destroy them, developing their activities, expanding their activities on those principles that cannot be implemented in old companies. This is also connected with the fact that humanity's supersystem and the supersystem in its development goes through such a cycle when it moves from a two-level organization, an element, a supersystem as a whole, to a multi-level organization, an element, certain functionally specialized structures that have existed for a long time, a certain flow of structureless governance. At the top there may be a certain structure that governs the supersystem as a whole or its region. This is a specific function, and further the supersystem as a whole. But in the process of development, this second stage transforms again into a two-level stage, an element, a supersystem as a whole. And in this third stage of the development of the supersystem, in fact, the main thing is the performance speed in the working out of informational algorithmic support, in its transfer to other regions of the supersystem, and in the mastery of this informational algorithmic support by the elements of the supersystem. Because you see, if you send a library to a society where they cannot read or write, or they read in another language, then sending a library does not solve the task. But if you send a library to a society where speed reading skills are mastered, then this can be very helpful in solving those tasks. But you see, the transition to the third phase of the development of the supersystem anyway requires some development of the elements. That is, every one of the elements of the supersystem must also go through some process of mastering its potential of development. And if the supersystem is built on the basis of the element base, renewable in the continuity of generations, then the development process of the elements must be stable throughout the entire process of development of the supersystem. Because if there is no process of mastering the potential of development by the elements of the supersystem, then the supersystem cannot develop and get stuck either in the first phase or in the second phase, but it cannot go into the third phase in any way. Further, there arises the question about the existence of specialized structures in this same third phase that carry the function of governance towards the supersystem as a whole. In fact, their existence is conditioned by how large the amount of that specific information is that is needed for the solution of these tasks, and how long it takes for an element of the supersystem to master it. This level of the supersystem can also exist in the third phase. But in the given case, it is of a more virtual character than the structurally formed, isolated one, but this in fact is a separate theme. This brings us to section 13.3, autosynchronization of processes in supersystems.
Вот. Дальше возникает
In fact, this is a small theme, so I will also cover it today, and after completing the consideration of autosynchronization as a phenomenon, we will complete today's lecture. So what is autosynchronization? There is a plurality of some functionally analogous elements. A certain number of elements begin to work out a certain program. Since information about this becomes the property of other elements, then, perceiving information of this kind, they also launch analogous programs in themselves. And as a result, it turns out that all the elements in the plurality act in the same way. Examples of autosynchronization: ovation in a hall. Spectators or participants of a gathering are sitting in the hall. One of them starts applauding, and everyone starts applauding.
Автосинхронизация процессов в суперсистеме.
In warm places, in meadows, some fireflies start blinking synchronously, and all the other fireflies are gradually drawn into the rhythm of their blinking, and they blink not uncoordinatedly, but synchronously. This is the phenomenon of autosynchronization, in the form in which we can observe it in the biosphere and in the life of human society. But if we talk about autosynchronization in the whole, then the question also arises: why did the first person start applauding? Does he really like the performance? Or is his task to sit in the hall and, according to the scenario of the performance, clap his hands at the right moment, and thereby involve the audience in the ovation? That is, if it is the second, his task is to sit in the hall and clap his hands at the right moments in time, then this is already governance. What is required for autosynchronization? First of all, informational algorithmic support necessary for the process of activity is required. If its elements do not carry this, then there is no possibility. Here is also a simple example on this theme. In a crowd of people, someone starts to sing a song. If the people like the song, then the others will join the singing. Who can't join? Those who do not know the words. The words in the given case are the informational algorithmic support that is required in order for someone to sing, and all the others to join, and the result is a choral performance of the song. Moreover, by and large, in some cases the conductor as a generator of the tempo is also not needed, because when people sing from the heart, they are in tune with each other. If they know how to sing, then the performance is good. And anyone can convince himself of this if he gathers friends and simply starts singing together, well, at least by printing out the words of those songs that they like, if they do not remember them. But if we talk about autosynchronization, then it can be organized both on the basis of informational algorithmic support of the fundamental part of the elements and on the basis of the variative part of the elements. Autosynchronization is really necessary because instincts of herd pack behavior in biological species are built on autosynchronization. If these instincts and autosynchronization did not exist, then many biological species would have disappeared a long time ago, since they would not have withstood the pressure of the environment. But autosynchronization can also be built on the basis of the variative part of the informational algorithmic support of the elements. In relation to humanity, considered as a supersystem, these are the norms of culture, knowledge and skills that we master while living in a civilized society. In general, people do not always ponder on this role. Nevertheless, the entire system of education in civilized societies, it is oriented, well, if not entirely and completely towards the possibility to launch autosynchronization processes, then it carries in itself a very significant component that really provides this kind of thing.
Но автосинхронизация может строиться и на основе вариативной
This is especially true of humanitarian knowledge, humanitarian sociological
по
knowledge.
отношению к человечеству рассматривая
Well, Vladimir Ilyich Lenin called it party membership in science.
те нормы культуры, знания и навыки,
When scientific theories are purpose-orientedly constructed to solve certain social problems in the interests of one class or one or another group of people. But he did not delve much into the consideration of how party membership in science affects the solution of these or those governorial tasks, primarily in the life of society.
запускать процессы автосинхронизации, то она несет в себе очень
Perhaps the first one who spoke about this, at least I don't know about others, maybe someone else spoke about it, was J.K. Galbraith, an American economist of the 20th century who began working in the team of F. Roosevelt. Further, he worked in the team of J. Kennedy. Both, as you can understand, were killed because their activities did not fully fit into the liberal bourgeois project. Nevertheless, Galbraith wrote a book in 1973, Economics and the Public Purpose. And there he directly writes about the institutional role of economic theories. Their institutional role is expressed in the fact that they are supposed to provide some knowledge on the basis of which a unified reaction of many people to a change in the economic situation would be worked out. That is, in essence, this is about the generation of processes of autosynchronization on the basis of those economic theories that are proposed by higher education institutions.
Тем не менее, Гилбрейт
But this applies not only to economic theories, because this is true in relation to the entire system of humanitarian and sociological disciplines.
Там прямо пишет об институциональной роли экономических теорий.
Just J.K. Galbraith, being an economist, was probably the first to see this role, since he was the closest to governance. You see, philosophers, sociologists, for the most part, are very far from governance. But nevertheless, they solve exactly this task, the creation of informational algorithmic support for the governance towards social processes on the basis of the mechanism of autosynchronization. In relation to human society, this problem is also connected with the typology of cultures. Because if we correlate with the typology of cultures, and the typology of cultures is governarially significant, determining the quality of life, it includes only three attributes: relation towards creative potential, relation towards совесть and shame, and relation towards will. Towards will as the ability to subjugate oneself and the course of events around to the meaningfully comprehended purpose consonants. A normal human, from the point of view of the conception of social safety, is characterized by the phrase, a will that realizes the creative potential under the power of the dictatorship of совесть. If one of the three components is missing, then there is no human. With this typology of cultures, the hierarchy of generalized means of governance is also connected. The first priority of generalized means of governance, and they are also weapons in relation to xenoconceptual systems, is gnoseology. That is, the doctrine of how man cognizes the world and how his creative activity is carried out. Everything that concerns autosynchronization, it can manifest itself on any of these six priorities. It can manifest itself in some combination of these priorities. But the main task is to reach the level when the process of autosynchronization affects the first priority of generalized means of governance. Because if autosynchronization flows in the form of cognitive creative activity, then society can quickly detect and solve all its problems. Because in this case, it does not need teachers who come and say, you have such problems here, we will solve them this way. To begin with, everyone has to be in class, I will teach you, and so on and so forth. A certain minimum will certainly continue to be provided by the system of education, but the main task of the system of education in this case is to bring everyone to the level where everyone can cognize and create to the measure of need in the stream of providence, in accordance with the dictatorship of совесть. That's all for today. All the best. Until next time.